Hi, everyone. My name is Sabrina Rising. Welcome to my channel. Tonight, we're going to talk about the significance of grief and why it is so integral to the process of everyday living. Most often, when we refer to grief, we talk about big, deep sadness that is triggered as a result of some major change and some major loss. And this is true. When we are experiencing a huge shift in our lives, it can be the loss of a loved one. It can be changing locations. It can be changing a workplace or relationship. Whatever the big event is, this will usually trigger a deep sense of loss, which can bring up sadness, which can bring up fear and uncertainty and insecurity and dysregulation and feelings of ungroundedness. And this is normal. Okay. And so this can be uncomfortable and unpleasant. And yet we are all very aware of the 7 stages of grief and the shock and denial that can occur when something major happens, especially when we have no control over the event. The shock can be even bigger and the denial can be even stronger. And so staying in that phase for as long as you need to, honoring yourself, as I always advocate, to meet our feelings with unconditional love and compassion. And then moving into that, pain and guilt stage where we start to internalize if something we've done is our fault, or if perhaps there's something we could have done to change it. And then moving into that next phase of anger and bargaining, and we fight for the things that we are used to. On some level, we resist change, essentially. In fact, most of us resist change because we are human beings and we are creatures of habit, and we make positive associations with our environments, with the people that are in those environments, with the way that we do things even. And to let go of those positive associations creates a deep void, right? It creates a deep sense of loss and disconnection. And this can be very uncomfortable, okay? As I mentioned, the 7 stages of grief, then we move into, a stage of acceptance, right? As we start to become aware of our process, if we're not talking about our feelings and getting help, for example, especially if the grief is very, very big and very deep, if we don't have a support system, we can easily fall into a state of depression, of isolation. And so it's very important to be aware that when there's a big change in your life, especially when it's a change that wasn't, decided by you, you had no control over it, it happened, it was something that was not premeditated, it wasn't planned, it was indeed a shock, and that can trigger some very, very, very unsettling feelings that can cause depression if you're not getting the support that you need. So I just want to advocate for the most common types of grief that most human beings encounter. When we have big events that can trigger this deep sense of loss and sadness. However, as a facilitator of personal development, I also believe that grief is just one of those things that we don't talk about enough as an integral process of transformation, right? So there is, as I just mentioned, the grief that we experience, when a big event happens in our lives, but there's also the choices that we're making when we're on a personal development journey to improve ourselves. We're making choices to either change jobs or change relationship or shift some way of showing up in the world, some way of operating. Maybe you're making a decision to, take responsibility for your health or your wealth or whatever it is that you're working on. When we choose to transform into a different version of ourselves, we also experience a stage of grief, right? And this can be very confusing for so many of us as we're on a healing journey. Usually we are letting go of the things that we are tired of, or that no longer serve us, or that maybe are toxic or detrimental to our well-being, or perhaps we're just deciding that we need a change, right? And so when these events happen, we are in full control. We're the ones in choice. We are making the decision to instigate this change cycle in our lives. And so we assume that, it's important to be excited. It's important to be happy. It's important to be content about the changes that we're making. And this is also true. And yet there is no awareness or space oftentimes made for the natural process of grief, which is integral to any kind of renewal that we're going through, right? We think about when something renews itself, it needs to die first, right? There are some aspect of it needs to die off first in order to make space for something new. right? I mean, there can be grief, a little experience of grief happening for you, even as you're decluttering your closet, right? There's a part of you that knows that this stuff needs to go and it's been taking up space for so long, and it's, you know, it's clogging you up energetically and emotionally. And so it feels good to cleanse. And there is still some part of you, perhaps, I know I experienced this when I declutter my closet or let go of anything for that matter, where I feel a small tinge of that empty feeling of that, oh, there is some sadness coming up, or there is some a sense of disconnection or loss that's coming up. And this is so normal. You know, we make positive associations with our environments, and when those positive associations change, they have nowhere to go. In fact, you may have heard this expression. I love this expression. Grief is simply love with nowhere to go. And this is so true, obviously, when there is a big event in our lives that happens, as I mentioned earlier, out of our control, where we feel like, you know, this, we've lost a loved one, or we've lost something that we really love, that we no longer can be in active three-dimensional relationship with. You know, and that can bring up a sense of, I don't know where this love can go. And it's the same process that happens internally as we shift on this personal development journey that we're on, as we make positive changes. You know, I work with so many people who are who have struggled with addiction, and even putting down their drug of choice creates a tremendous sense of loss, a tremendous void. And this can bring up a huge sense of grief. And it's always tied to the same thing, whether it's a substance you're letting go of, or, as I mentioned earlier, decluttering your closet, or maybe it's changing location, or maybe it's, you know, getting a new job, or whatever the change is. It's so important to recognize that we are letting go of some version of ourselves. There is an aspect of our identity that is dying off, you know, that we are saying goodbye to, and in order to make room for this new self, this new experience, right? And so it's very important that we learn to normalize grief as part of, you know, as I mentioned earlier, as an integral part of the renewal process. You know, that can happen in microscopic doses throughout the day, whether that is, you know, changing from, you know, one thing, one event, or one situation, or one set of circumstances to another, or one conversation to another, one way of operating to another. Throughout the day, we undergo different, you know, series of personal expression and personal transformation. And so just honoring that little sense of loss or disconnection in the moment, as we shift from space to space, as we shift from experience to experience. And if you're on a personal development journey, as I am, you know, I know recently in my own life, I made some huge changes, and they were wonderful changes that I said yes to on so many levels. And yet it brought up a deep experience of grieving for me, grieving of an older version of myself, a version of myself that I had been for so long. In fact, the more complacent and comfortable we become with our way of operating, the more it can be difficult to, first of all, accept that change is required or necessary or even beneficial. And the more grief it can trigger, because we are creatures of habit, and we become so used to, so ingrained to our way of being, that shifting that can leave us feeling rudderless, ungrounded, disconnected, insecure. And so this is very important. So if you're in a situation in your life where you've created a big change, or there is a big change happening, keep in mind that the grieving process is something that you need to make time for, to learn to really sit with and honor yourself, and really go through those stages to make sure that you're giving yourself permission to withdraw, and to be with your feelings, and to self-nurture, and suspending all judgment as always, and really process those emotions, meet them with unconditional love and compassion, so you can create that foundation of acceptance. And it's in that grieving process that we give ourselves permission to really move into that next phase with integrity. Okay, if we're experiencing shock and denial in those early stages of grief, and we're trying to hurry up and jump to acceptance, you know, we've bypassed some very integral steps that really don't honor us where we are, right? And so I think in modern society, it's very normal to try to power through events, or power through feelings, or power through the circumstances of your life, disconnecting from our uncomfortable feelings or whatever process we really need to have in order to be fully present. And this can create all kinds of physical symptoms, right? All kinds of uh, um, unmet needs that can happen mentally, emotionally, and physically. So just notice if you're pushing yourself too hard through any change and trying to, put on a happy face, as we say in our society, and try to power through things, or grin and bear it, which is another very common expression. These all point to the level of consciousness in our society and how we relate to change and how we relate to the possibility of just needing to move a little bit slower as we're shifting things in our lives, right? So it's very important to give yourself permission to sit with your grief and to normalize grief and to make it part of your renewal process, to acknowledge that feeling a little bit sad, a little disconnected and ungrounded in a moment of change, even if it's a good change, is completely human and completely normal, and also completely necessary to the integration of your experience, which establishes the foundation of acceptance with integrity. So you're not pushing yourself too hard and hurrying up, trying to jump to the outcome, trying to jump to the next level. You're really allowing yourself, and this is something we don't do enough of in our society, we're really allowing ourselves to be in the experience that we're having with honor, with presence, with unconditional love, with grace, and with self-care, so that we can get through whatever it is we're moving through fully ready and fully embodied for this next phase of life. It could be life after divorce. It could be life in the new job. It could be life in the new location, or life, after the loss of a loved one. Wherever you are in your grieving process, it's really important to honor this phase and to see it as a way of preparing you for whatever it is that you're going to embrace and embody next, wherever you're going to allow your love to flow through and for next. And that is so, so, so important. So I hope this was helpful. If you enjoy my content, please don't forget to subscribe, and I would love to see any comments or questions below.